The human girl's skull crumpled under the brutal force of the mercenary's armored fist. 12-year-old Emma, with her golden hair now soaked in blood and brain matter, collapsed lifelessly onto the ground. Standing over her lifeless body, the mercenary, known as Riker, had his suit's armor splattered with crimson. He had been hired to deliver a grim message, and the death of this young human girl served that purpose perfectly. The alarms of the New Eden colony blared as its citizens rushed to find the source of the chaos. They stumbled upon Emma's broken form abandoned in the park, a horrifying discovery that sent shockwaves rippling through the colony and across the stars to Earth. Videos of Riker's brutal act quickly went viral, igniting outrage among humans everywhere. The United Nations of Earth convened an emergency meeting, where President Eleanor delivered a passionate address, promising to hold Solaris accountable. Today, a human child was mercilessly murdered on New Eden, Grant declared, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. This slaughter by a mercenary cannot go unanswered. Humanity demands justice, and justice we shall have. In response, the UNS authorized the swift mobilization and deployment of a massive military force. Led by the battle-hardened Commander Jake Matthews, who was determined to prevent further bloodshed, the fleet departed for the Pack Lead homeworld, a planet in the midst of a controversial terraforming project. As the UNS fleet approached, their scanners detected an energy shield far more advanced than what was thought to be within the Pack Lead's capabilities. Some factions within the Pack Lead government saw the impending human invasion as an opportunity for power grabs, while radicals like the scientist Solaris viewed the Earthlings as an existential threat to their way of life. Human drop ships barreled through the turbulent atmosphere, their rockets blazing against the orange sky. The fate of both species hung in the balance as Matthews and his troops braced for a perilous mission into unknown territory. Commander Matthews gripped his assault rifle tightly, resolute in his determination to bring the perpetrator to justice, no matter the cost. The drop ships pierced the stormy skies, flames licking at their hulls as lightning crackled around them. Inside the lead craft, Commander Matthews gripped the overhead rail, his face set in grim determination as the ship shook violently. 30 seconds to landing, the pilot shouted over the roar of the engines. Matthews nodded, adrenaline coursing through him as he checked his weapon one last time. His soldiers, equally resolute, prepared for the landing. The drop ship touched down with a jarring thud, the ramp slamming open to reveal a harsh alien landscape. Wind howled across the rocky terrain, carrying the acrid smell of burnt metal and ozone. Matthews leapt from the craft, boots crunching on gravel as his soldiers fanned out behind him. No sooner had they established a perimeter than a squad of heavily armed Pack Lead soldiers emerged from the shadows, their weapons aimed at the humans. At their head was General Talos, his dark eyes gleaming with hostility. "Withdraw immediately," Talos growled, his voice dripping with menace. "Your presence here violates Pack Lead sovereignty." Matthews stepped forward, his rifle held low but ready. "I'm here to discuss the surrender of the war criminal Solaris and to prevent further attacks on human colonies. Take me to your leaders." Talos sneered. "The only thing we'll give you is a quick death." Suddenly, a shot rang out, echoing across the desolate landscape. A Pack Lead soldier collapsed in surprise. Instantly, the air erupted with the sound of automatic gunfire as both sides engaged, muzzle flashes strobing in the dim light. Matthews dove for cover behind a boulder as his troops returned fire. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks, sending up clouds of dust and debris. The human soldiers, well-trained and disciplined, faced off against the Pack Lead's numerical advantage and familiar terrain. Amidst the chaos, Matthews' wrist communicator beeped urgently. Ducking down, he pressed the device to his ear. "Matthews here." "Commander," a muffled voice said, "I have information about Solaris, but you're walking into a trap." Matthews' eyes narrowed. "Who is this? How do you know about Solaris?" "No time to explain," the voice replied, urgency and fear evident. "Zorax is using you as a pawn. Solaris is on the other side of the planet, at these coordinates." A string of numbers appeared on Matthews' display. Matthews hesitated, torn between his duty to his soldiers and the urgent need for justice. If this was a trap, He could be leading his troops to their deaths. But if the information was accurate, he might end the conflict before it spiraled further. Commander Matthews weighed the options in his mind as the battle raged around him. The coordinates flashed on his display, a potential lead to Solaris that could end the conflict or lead them into a deadly ambush. With a deep breath, he made his decision. The safety of his soldiers and the future of the colony depended on it. "Hold the line," Matthews shouted to his troops. "We're moving out." As his team regrouped and prepared to advance, the Pack Lead soldiers continued their relentless assault, their weapons creating a storm of fire and smoke. Matthews and his soldiers maneuvered through the harsh terrain, taking cover behind rocks and boulders as they made their way towards the coordinates provided. The air was thick with the acrid smell of battle and the distant rumble of the terraforming machinery, which had transformed the planet's surface into a chaotic environment. The oppressive heat and the lightning flashes added to the sense of urgency as Matthews led his squad through the rocky landscape. After hours of tense navigation, they reached the coordinates, a remote area with a large, reinforced structure partially hidden by the tumultuous weather. It appeared to be an abandoned facility, its exterior scarred by previous conflicts and the harsh conditions of the terraforming process. "Keep your eyes open," Matthews ordered. "This could be a trap." They approached the facility cautiously, the tension palpable among his squad. As they reached the entrance, they found it sealed with a high-tech lock. Matthews used his equipment to bypass the security, and the door slid open with a heavy groan. Inside, the facility was dark and eerily quiet. The walls were lined with various alien technologies and machinery, and the dim lighting cast long shadows across the room. Matthews led his team through the corridors, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Suddenly, a voice crackled over their comms. "Commander Matthews, you're in the right place, but you need to hurry. Solaris is here, but so is Zorax, and he's not alone." Matthews' heart raced as he and his team pressed on. They reached a central control room where Solaris stood surrounded by a group of heavily armed Pack Lead soldiers. At the far end of the room, Zorax, an imposing figure with a menacing glare, watched from a raised platform. "Welcome, humans," Zorax said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've walked right into my trap. Solaris is mine to deal with." Solaris, a scientist known for his controversial experiments, looked up with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You're too late," he said. "This world is on the brink of a new era, and you can't stop it now." Matthews took a step forward, his rifle aimed at Zorax. "We're here for justice. Surrender Solaris and end this conflict before more lives are lost." Zorax chuckled, his eyes narrowing. "You think you have the upper hand? This facility is rigged to explode, and you're all trapped here." The room erupted in chaos as Zorax's soldiers advanced, weapons raised. Matthews' team fought back fiercely, their training and discipline shining through despite the overwhelming odds. The battle was intense, with both sides exchanging fire amidst the facility's crumbling infrastructure. As the fighting continued, Matthews spotted a control panel in the corner of the room. With a surge of determination, he made his way toward it, hoping to disable the explosives and turn the tide of the battle. He hacked into the system, fingers flying over the controls, trying to defuse the situation. Just as the countdown reached its final moments, Matthews managed to deactivate the explosive mechanism. He turned to face Zorax, who was now engaged in a desperate fight with his own soldiers as the facility's defenses crumbled. With the immediate threat neutralized, Matthews apprehended Solaris. "You're coming with us," he said firmly. "Your actions have cost countless lives, and it's time you answer for them." As the battle wound down and the Pack Lead soldiers surrendered or retreated, Matthews and his team emerged victorious but weary. They had succeeded in their mission, capturing Solaris and averting a catastrophic explosion. The storm of conflict had passed, but the journey for justice was far from over. With Solaris in custody, Matthews and his team prepared to return to their fleet, knowing that their actions had made a crucial difference in the ongoing struggle between their worlds. The horizon of the Pack Lead homeworld glowed ominously as Commander Jake Matthews and his team returned to their drop ships, the dark sky punctuated by distant flashes of lightning. The battle had been grueling, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. With Solaris in custody, they were now tasked with returning to their fleet and securing the prisoner. The drop ships lifted off from the crumbling facility, the roiling storm clouds parting slightly to reveal a smattering of stars. Inside the drop ship, Matthews reviewed the data on his console, his face etched with fatigue. The battle had been costly, and he knew that the ramifications of their actions would ripple across both human and Pack Lead societies. "Commander Matthews," came a voice from the comms system, "we're detecting multiple incoming signals from the Pack Lead fleet. They're mobilizing, and it looks like they're preparing for a counteroffensive." Matthews glanced at his officers, their expressions tense as they processed the news. "Prepare for potential engagement," he ordered. "We need to get back to the fleet and inform them of the situation." As the dropship soared through the turbulent atmosphere, the team's thoughts turned to the upcoming diplomatic challenges. Solaris, though captured, was a figure of immense importance, and his fate would have far-reaching consequences. The scientist's experiments had pushed the boundaries of ethical science, and his actions had triggered a conflict that had now cost many lives. Upon reaching the UNS fleet, the drop ships were met with a flurry of activity. The massive warships and support vessels were in a state of heightened alert, and the atmosphere on the command deck was one of controlled chaos. Commander Matthews and his team disembarked, and Solaris was swiftly escorted to a secure holding area. President Eleanor Grant, having received updates on the situation, awaited Matthews in the fleet's command center. Her face was grave as she reviewed the latest intelligence reports. Matthews approached, his expression resolute despite the exhaustion. "Commander Matthews," Grant greeted him, her tone serious. "The Pack Lead are preparing for a large-scale counterattack. We need to ensure that our fleet is ready and that Solaris is secured." "What's the latest?" "We've captured Solaris, but the situation remains volatile," Matthews replied. "Zorax's forces are regrouping, and their fleet is on high alert. We need to bolster our defenses and prepare for any potential retaliation." Grant nodded, her gaze steady. "We're already mobilizing additional reinforcements. The Pack Lead's response could determine the future of this conflict. We need to handle this situation with both strength and diplomacy." "Understood," Matthews said. "What about the negotiations?" "We need to ensure that Solaris capture doesn't lead to further escalation." Grant's expression softened slightly. "We're preparing to initiate peace talks. However, the Pack Lead government is fractured, and not all factions are in agreement. We must tread carefully." As the fleet prepared for potential conflict, Matthews turned his attention to the tactical operations. He met with his officers, outlining strategies to fortify their position and counter any offensive maneuvers by the Pack Lead. The tension was palpable as they went over their defensive plans, preparing for a possible confrontation. Meanwhile, Solaris sat in his secure cell, his expression a mix of defiance and resignation. He knew the gravity of his situation and the potential consequences of his actions. As Matthews passed by his cell, Solaris looked up with a steely gaze. "You think you've won?" Solaris sneered. "The Pack Lead will not bow to your demands. You've merely ignited a fire that will consume us all." Matthews met his gaze unflinchingly. "This isn't about victory or defeat. It's about preventing further bloodshed and finding a path to peace. Your actions have led us to this point, and now it's time to face the consequences." As the days passed, the tension between the two factions continued to build. The Pack Lead fleet remained a looming threat, and diplomatic negotiations were fraught with complications. The United Nations of Earth sought to establish a framework for peace, but the divided Pack Lead government made progress slow and uncertain. In the midst of these challenges, Commander Matthews found moments of reflection. The weight of leadership and the burden of the conflict pressed heavily on him. He knew that the path ahead would be fraught with difficulties, but he was determined to see it through, to ensure that the sacrifices made were not in vain. As the UNS fleet stood ready, the fate of both human and Pack Lead civilizations hung in the balance. The next steps would determine whether the conflict would escalate into a full-scale war, or if a tenuous peace could be forged from the ashes of their strife. With the stakes higher than ever, Commander Matthews and President Grant knew that every decision would shape the future of their worlds. The next chapter in their intertwined histories was yet to be written, and the path to resolution would require both courage and diplomacy. The tension in the command center was palpable as President Eleanor Grant and Commander Jake Matthews prepared for the upcoming peace talks. The vast expanse of space outside the observation windows seemed to reflect the gravity of their situation, a serene backdrop to the chaotic realities of interstellar conflict. The UNS fleet remained on high alert, with every ship and soldier ready for a possible escalation. The diplomatic team, led by seasoned negotiators, was working around the clock to prepare for the talks with the Pack Lead representatives. Meanwhile, Matthews took a moment to gather his thoughts in his quarters, reviewing the latest intelligence reports and strategizing potential scenarios. A knock on the door interrupted his focus. It was Lieutenant Sarah Lee, his trusted second-in-command. "Commander, we're ready for the briefing on the peace talks. The President wants you to join her." Matthews nodded, rising from his desk. "Lead the way." In the briefing room, Grant was already engaged in discussions with the lead negotiators. The atmosphere was intense but focused as they reviewed the terms and conditions for the upcoming negotiations. The Pack Lead government had agreed to the talks, but the fractured nature of their leadership meant that no agreement could be taken for granted. As Matthews entered, Grant gestured for him to take a seat. "Commander Matthews, thank you for joining us. We're finalizing the agenda for the talks. The Pack Lead have insisted on certain conditions, and it's crucial that we understand their position fully." One of the negotiators, a woman named Dr. Maya Thompson, looked up from her notes. "The Pack Lead have agreed to discuss a ceasefire and the potential terms for Solaris surrender. However, they've also demanded that we withdraw our fleet from their space and guarantee no further military actions against them." Matthews frowned. "That's a significant concession. If we agree to withdraw, it could leave us vulnerable and potentially signal weakness. What's their stance on the security of human colonies?" "They're willing to discuss a mutual security arrangement," Dr. Thompson replied. "But their primary focus is on the immediate cessation of hostilities and ensuring their sovereignty is respected." Grant nodded thoughtfully. "We need to balance our demands with the need to de-escalate the situation. I want to make it clear that we're committed to peace, but will not compromise on our security or our principles." Matthews agreed. "We must ensure that any agreement provides solid guarantees for the protection of our colonies and that it addresses the root causes of the conflict." The team spent the next several hours preparing for the negotiations, drafting proposals and counterproposals. The talks were scheduled to take place on neutral ground, aboard a diplomatic vessel stationed at the edge of Pack Lead space. The location was chosen to ensure both parties had equal access and to minimize the risk of any further skirmishes. As the time for the talks approached, Matthews and Grant made their final preparations. The atmosphere on the UNS flagship was a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Matthews took one last look at the battle-scarred planet below, reflecting on the precarious position they found themselves in. When the diplomatic vessel arrived at the designated meeting point, the Pack Lead delegation was already present. The vessel's sleek design and advanced technology contrasted sharply with the battered UNS ships, symbolizing the delicate balance of power at play. The negotiations began with formal pleasantries, but the underlying tension was palpable. General Talos, the Pack Lead representative, was a formidable presence. His imposing figure and sharp gaze conveyed his resolve. Solaris, now in shackles, was also present, his demeanor a mix of defiance and resignation. President Grant took the lead, presenting the UNS's position with clarity and firmness. "We are here to discuss terms for a ceasefire and to establish a framework for lasting peace. Our primary goals are the protection of our colonies and a sustainable resolution to the conflict." Talos responded, his voice steady. "We agree to discuss a ceasefire, but our sovereignty must be respected. The presence of your fleet in our space is unacceptable. We demand that you withdraw your forces immediately." Matthews, seated next to Grant, interjected. "We cannot agree to withdraw our fleet without ensuring that our colonies are secure. We need solid assurances that the Pack Lead will not initiate further attacks." Solaris, from his position, spoke up. "The conflict was never intended to escalate to this level. My actions, though misguided, were driven by a belief in a new era for our species. I implore you to find common ground before it's too late." The talks proceeded with tense negotiations, each side presenting their demands and counteroffers. As the hours wore on, it became clear that reaching a consensus would be challenging. The Pack Lead's demands were uncompromising, and the UNS's requirements were non-negotiable. During a brief recess, Matthews and Grant discussed their options. "We need to find a compromise," Grant said, her voice weary. "If we can't reach an agreement, this conflict could spiral out of control." Matthews nodded. "We should consider proposing a phased withdrawal of our fleet, contingent on verified compliance with the ceasefire terms. That might give the Pack Lead enough reassurance while allowing us to maintain a level of security." Grant agreed, and they returned to the negotiation table with a revised proposal. The discussion continued late into the night, with both sides making incremental progress. By the end of the negotiations, an agreement was within reach: a tentative ceasefire, with a phased withdrawal of UNS forces and a joint commitment to monitor and ensure compliance. The terms were far from perfect, but they provided a foundation for further discussions and a potential path to lasting peace. As the talks concluded, there was a sense of cautious optimism. The road ahead would be challenging, but the agreement marked a crucial step towards de-escalating the conflict. Commander Matthews and President Grant returned to their ship, knowing that the success of the peace process would depend on the implementation of the agreement and the willingness of both sides to honor their commitments. The galaxy watched and waited, the fate of their civilizations hanging in the balance as they prepared for the next chapter in their tumultuous history.